Mara Bellamy sat alone in her car outside the attorney's office for 12 minutes after her brothers walked away. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She just sat there with both hands resting on the manila envelope in her lap, feeling the shape of the old brass key inside it, while Grant's laugh kept moving through her mind like something that had gotten trapped in a room and could not find the door. $11. That was what her father had paid for the property at 14 Cutter's Gap Road. $11 at a tax auction nearly 20 years ago for a house in Creole County. That nobody wanted a house the county had marked unsafe, twice a house with broken windows, a burned corner of the second floor, no working electricity, no running water, and a front porch that looked one hard storm away from falling into the weeds. Grant had received the savings account. Ellis had received the pickup truck, the investment certificates, the furniture, and half of the good land outside Bowling Green. Between them, they had walked out of that office with nearly everything that looked like it could still be counted, sold, driven, stored, or divided. Mara had received a key to a condemned house. Grant laughed first. Ellis tried to keep his face straight, but only for a second. Then he looked down at the floor and made that small, breathy sound he always made when he thought he was being polite, but could not help himself. Grant's wife, who had not visited Silas Bellamy once during the last 6 months of his life, covered her mouth with 2 fingers and looked away like the whole thing had embarrassed her, not because it was cruel, because it was awkward. But it was Warren Pike, the attorney, who had said the sentence Mara could not stop hearing. Before he closed the folder, he looked at her across the polished desk and said, "Your father told me you would see what everyone else missed." Mara had not answered him. She had only stared at the envelope. Now, in the parking lot, her son Jonah slept in the back seat with his cheek pressed against the window. He was 7 years old, still wearing the navy coat from the church donation room, the sleeves too long and the zipper missing one tooth near the top. His sketchbook lay open on his lap. On the page was a half-finished drawing of a house with smoke coming from the chimney, even though Mara and Jonah had not had a chimney of their own in a very long time. Mara looked at him for a while. Then she looked back at the envelope. Her father had left her a ruin, a place the county wanted to tear down, a place her brothers had considered so worthless that Grant had leaned toward her before leaving the office and said, "I can give you $5,000 for it if you do not want the headache." $5,000. He had said it like charity. Mara had not told him that she had $312 in her checking account. She had not told him that she was 2 weeks behind on the storage unit where most of her life was packed in plastic tubs. She had not told him that 3 nights ago Jonah had asked if sleeping in the car was something families did when they were almost home. She had only folded the papers, placed them back into the envelope, and thanked the attorney. That was what Mara did. She showed up. She answered calls. She carried what needed carrying, even when no one noticed. Even when the person she was carrying it for had once left her behind. Silas Bellamy had not abandoned her all at once. That might have been easier to name. He had disappeared in smaller ways. Missed birthdays, shorter phone calls, promises that softened into excuses. Years when Mara learned not to wait by the window because waiting was just another way to be hurt. For a long time she hated him for it. Then she got tired. Then Jonah was born, and one night, looking down at her newborn son Mara, decided that whatever kind of father Silas had been, Jonah would still know what it felt like to have a grandfather. Say. So she drove to him, 3 hours each way. Every other month at first, then every few weeks when his health began to fail. She filled his pill organizer. She sat through doctor visits. She brought groceries. She answered the phone at 2 in the morning when the rehabilitation center said he had fallen again. She did not do it because he deserved it. She did it because Jonah deserved better than another empty place at the table. And in the last month of his life, Silas had looked at her from a hospital bed, his face thin, his hand cold in hers, and said, "You always could see the good bones." At the time, Mara thought it was just guilt. A small apology offered too late. Now she was not so sure. She took out her phone and typed 14 Cutter's Gap Road into the map. 41 minutes. East of Lexington, past the bare fields and the county roads and whatever waited at the end of them. Mara started the car. She did not know what her father had seen in a condemned house that cost $11. She did not know why he had kept it for 20 years and never said a word. She only knew he had left it to her. Not to the sons who had laughed, not to the people who knew how to sell things quickly, but to the daughter who had kept showing up and as Jonah slept behind her and the old key shifted inside the envelope on her lap, Mara pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward Creole County. Stay with me until the end, because what Mara found inside that house did not just change her future. It changed what she understood about her father, about herself, and about the difference between what the world calls worthless and what only the right person knows how to find. The drive to Creole County took Mara past the edge of Lexington, past gas stations and winter fields under a pale gray sky. Jonah slept most of the way. Mara kept the radio off. The map led her from the highway to a county road, then to a narrow gravel lane between two empty fields. At the end of that lane stood the house. She stopped the car. For a moment she did not move. The photograph Warren Pike had given her had softened the damage. Up close there was no mercy in it. The house was 2 stories of peeling white boards and dark windows. The left side of the porch hung crooked over the dead grass. A section of roof above the second floor had burned through, leaving black rafters open to the sky. Most windows were boarded. The ones that were not boarded were broken. Near the lane, a county notice leaned on a wooden stake. Demolition order. The words had faded, but they were still easy to read. Jonah stirred in the back seat and sat up. He rubbed his eyes, then looked out the window. Is that it? Mara nodded. That is it. Jonah studied the house for a long time. It looks like everybody forgot it, he said. Mara looked at the stone foundation at the front wall, still standing straight at the chimney, rising through the middle like a spine. Maybe, she said, but forgotten is not the same as finished. She stepped out into the cold and told Jonah to stay. Then she walked the outside slowly. The porch was bad, but the foundation beneath it had not shifted. The burned corner was ugly, but the lower frame still looked solid. The back door had swollen in its frame. The yard was full of weeds and old shingles, but the house sat square on the land, stubborn and quiet. Mara knew a little about old houses. Her mother had taught her to look past paint and dust, to touch the frame before judging the room. A house would tell the truth if you touched it right. So, Mara touched this one. She pressed her hand to the porch, post window frame, side wall, and the foundation. Then she went back to the car, took the key from the envelope, and walked to the front door. The padlock was rusted almost through. The key turned halfway stuck, then turned again. The lock snapped open with a sound too loud in the empty yard. Mara pushed the door. Cold air breathed out. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood, old ash mouse nests, and cedar left in a drawer. She stood in the doorway until her eyes adjusted. The first room was full of plaster, fallen boards, and leaves. A brick fireplace rose along the far wall. The mantel was carved but covered in soot. Beyond it, a hallway led toward the kitchen. Mara did not go far that first day. She only looked. Then she came back the next morning after dropping Jonah at school. And the next morning. She worked from daylight until the cold became too sharp. She carried trash out by the bag. She swept glass into piles. She dragged broken chairs, curtains, and pieces of ceiling into the yard. She patched 2 windows with plastic and propped the porch with scrap timber. By the end of the first week, the ground floor had begun to show itself. High ceilings, deep windowsills, a stone hearth in the kitchen, a back staircase with thick wooden treads. The house was damaged, but it had been built by someone who expected it to last. On the 5th afternoon, Mara was clearing debris near the kitchen wall when she saw the footprints. She stopped. The dust in the rest of the kitchen lay soft and gray, untouched for years. But these prints were sharp, recent, adult boots. They crossed from the back door to the center of the room, then turned toward the fireplace wall. Mara stared at them. The padlock had been on the front door when she arrived. The county notice was 3 years old. Someone had been here before her. Someone who had walked inside, looked around, and left without telling anyone. Mara stood in the cold kitchen listening to the wind move through the broken roof. Then she looked toward the wall where the footprints stopped. She did not know yet what they meant, but she knew they meant something. Mara came back to the house the next morning with a flashlight, a hammer, and the kind of caution that comes when fear and curiosity walk into the same room together. She had thought about the footprints all night. Not because she believed the house was haunted. Mara did not have the luxury of believing in ghosts. She believed in unpaid bills, empty gas tanks, county notices, and people who showed up smiling after they had already taken more than their share. The footprints had not appeared by accident. Someone had been inside that kitchen. Someone had stood near the fireplace wall. So Mara started there. She dropped Jonah at school, drove back to Cutter's Gap Road, and stood in front of the old brick fireplace with her coat zipped to her chin. Sunlight came through the plastic over the windows, pale and thin, making the dust look like smoke. She placed both hands against the plaster. At first, she felt only cold, then cracks, then the soft crumble of old wall. She moved slowly, pressing along the surface the way her mother had once taught her to check for rot behind paint. A house will lie with its face, her mother used to say, but never with its bones. Mara pressed higher. Nothing. She pressed lower. Nothing. Then near the right side of the fireplace, her palm met something that did not give. She froze. The shape beneath the plaster was not a beam. It was too wide, too smooth, too exact. She ran her fingers around it and felt the edges of a rectangle hidden under paint and old plaster. Her heartbeat changed. She stepped back and lifted the flashlight. In the angled light, she could see it now. A faint outline nearly invisible unless someone knew to look. 2 feet across, maybe a little taller, covered so carefully that a person could live in that house for years and never notice. Mara looked down at the footprints. They ended only a few feet away. She did not know whether the person who had made them had found this outline too. She only knew she was looking at something that had been hidden on purpose. For a long moment, Mara stood still. Then she picked up the hammer. The first strike cracked the plaster. The second sent white dust down the front of her coat. She hit it again, then stopped and used her hands, pulling the broken pieces away gently, careful not to damage whatever waited behind them. Metal appeared in the wall. Dark steel. Not a pipe. Not wiring. A door. Mara pulled more plaster away until the whole shape showed itself. It was an old wall safe built between the studs and sealed so smoothly that time had almost swallowed it. The face had a round combination dial, a heavy handle, and a faded border pressed into the steel. Mara crouched in front of it. She touched the dial. It did not move. She tried the handle. Nothing. The safe sat there silent and locked like it had been waiting longer than she had been alive. Mara took a photograph. Then she sat back on her heels and let out the breath she had been holding. At pickup that afternoon, Jonah asked why her hair was full of white dust. Mara said, "I found a door inside a wall." Jonah's eyes widened. A secret door. Something like that. That evening at the shelter table, while Jonah colored quietly beside her, Mara searched for locksmiths near Creole Junction. Only one name came up twice. Nolan Briggs, 40 years in the trade. No storefront, just a phone number and an address outside town. She called him the next morning. Nolan arrived 2 days later in a faded blue truck carrying a toolbox that looked older than Mara. He was thin, gray-bearded, and quiet. He did not ask many questions. He only stepped inside, looked at the safe, and gave a low whistle. "Pre-war," he said. "Good steel. Good mechanism if it has not rusted shut. Can you open it? Maybe. Maybe." He glanced at her. "I can drill it fast, or I can coax it slow. Fast ruins the door. Slow keeps its secrets intact." Mara looked at the safe. Then she looked around the ruined room her father had left her. "Slow," she said. Nolan nodded. He came back with better tools on Friday morning. He worked for hours, listening more than forcing turning the dial by tiny measures while Mara swept nearby and tried not to watch. At 2:37 in the afternoon, something inside the wall gave a deep, tired click. Nolan turned the handle. The door opened. For a few seconds, Mara did not move. The open safe was dark inside, but it was not damp. That surprised her first. The rest of the house had taken in weather dust smoke and years, but the old steel box had kept its own small room untouched. Nolan leaned closer, then stopped himself. "I will step back," he said. "Whatever is in there belongs to you." Mara nodded, though her throat felt too tight to speak. She reached inside. The first thing she touched was cloth, brown with age, wrapped carefully, tied with cord so brittle it broke under her fingers. She unfolded it on the floor and found a pocket watch, gold-colored heavy, engraved on the back, with the year 1911. Beside it was a woman's brooch, set with small, pale stones. Then a man's ring, with a dark red center. Then a folded paper sealed in a flattened tin box. Behind those were 2 larger bundles. Mara lifted one. The cloth fell away. Money. Old bills larger than the ones in her wallet, flat and dry, held in bands that cracked when she touched them. The printing looked sharp. The faces and numbers seemed almost too clear for something that had slept in a wall for so long. Jonah, who had been doing homework on the living room floor, came quietly to the kitchen doorway. "Mom," he whispered. Mara did not look away from the safe. I know. What is all that? She swallowed. I do not know yet. At the back of the safe was a pouch. When Mara opened it, 26 gold coins slid into her palm and caught the pale afternoon light. For the first time that day, Nolan spoke without meaning to. Lord have mercy. Mara closed her fingers around the coins before her hands could start shaking. Then she opened the tin box. Inside was a letter. 3 pages folded with care, the ink faded brown but still readable. At the top was a date, October 14th, 1943. The name at the bottom was Edmund Weller. Mara sat on the kitchen floor near the cold hearth and began to read. Edmund Weller had been born in that house in 1881. His father had laid the first stones of the foundation. Edmund had added the back staircase, the kitchen hearth, and the porch after he married a woman named Clara. He wrote that Clara had worn the brooch on Sundays and that the watch had belonged to his father. He wrote that he had lived long enough to see Banks' close neighbors lose farms and good men stand in bread lines with their hats in their hands. He had watched one war take boys from their homes and another war take his only son across the ocean. He no longer trusted the world to protect what a person had earned, so he sealed the watch, the jewelry, the currency, and the coins inside the wall. If my son returns, he wrote, he will know where to look. Mara paused. The house was quiet around her. She kept reading. If my son does not return, then let the house keep these things until the right person comes. I have lived long enough to know that not all treasure belongs to the one who reaches it first. Some things must wait for the one who understands why they were saved. Mara read that sentence twice, then a third time. She thought of Silas Bellamy paying $11 for this property. She thought of him keeping it for 20 years, never repairing it, never selling it, never mentioning it to Grant or Ellis. She thought of Warren Pike looking across the desk and saying, your father told me you would see what everyone else missed. Maybe Silas had known. Maybe he had not known exactly. Maybe he had only walked through the ruined rooms, once touched the walls, and felt what Mara had felt. Good bones. She looked over at Jonah. Her son stood very still, his pencil still in one hand, his face serious in a way that made him look older than 7. Are we going to be okay now? He asked. The question was small. The weight of it was not. Mara thought about the storage bill, the motel shifts, the nights when she counted dollars in the car and pretended Jonah was asleep, the shelter intake form, the way she had learned to say temporary as if the word itself could build a roof. She looked down at the gold coin in her palm. Then she looked back at her son. Yes, she said. Jonah blinked. Really? Mara's voice stayed quiet, but this time it did not have to pretend. Yes, baby, we are. That night, after Nolan locked the safe door open and promised to give her the name of someone honest in Lexington, Mara sat alone at the kitchen table. Jonah slept nearby under 2 donated blankets. 1 gold coin lay in front of her. The lantern light warmed it. For 8 months, Mara had held herself together by refusing to look too long at how close they were to falling. Now, with no one watching, one breath broke in the middle. She pressed her hand over her eyes, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the room to know she had finally stopped carrying it alone. Mara did not call her brothers that night. She did not call them the next morning either. Instead, she drove into Creole Junction with the watch, 2 notes, 1 coin, and the brooch wrapped in a towel inside her purse. Nolan had written a name on a receipt. Evelyn Hart, Main Street Antiques. The shop sat beside a closed pharmacy on the square. Inside, the air smelled like lemon oil paper and wood. Evelyn Hart was silver-haired and careful. She looked at the watch first, then the brooch, then the coin. When Mara placed 1 old bill on the counter, Evelyn put on her glasses and stopped talking. Where did you get these? She asked. Mara told her enough. Evelyn listened, then folded her hands. You need a specialist before you sell anything. Not a pawn shop, not a collector with cash. A real appraiser. She wrote another name. Adrian Cole, Lexington. Mara called him from the car with Jonah eating crackers beside her. Adrian sounded cautious. That made Mara trust him. He came 6 days later with a leather case, a small lamp, white gloves, and a notebook full of numbers. For 3 hours, he worked at the kitchen table, examining each bill coin and piece of jewelry. He photographed markings. He checked dates. He read the letter twice without speaking. When he finished, he sat across from her. Miss Bellamy, this is not a final appraisal, he said, but I can give you a working range. Mara kept her hands under the table. The low end is around $290,000. The high end may pass $400,000 depending on condition and buyers. Jonah dropped his pencil in the next room. Mara looked at the page. Adrian turned toward her. The numbers stayed there. They did not vanish. She thanked him at the door, watched his car leave, then returned to the kitchen and sat. Her phone buzzed. "Grant, just checking on you. Let us know if you need help with that place." Mara stared at the message until the screen went dark. Then she turned the phone face down. The next morning, she called Warren Pike. He listened without interrupting as she explained the safe letter coins and Adrian's estimate. When she finished, Warren was quiet. "The law is clear," he said. "The property transferred to you. Contents discovered within the property belong to you unless the will says otherwise." "They will try to fight it," Mara said. "Probably." She closed her eyes. "There is something else Warren said. Your father signed an affidavit 14 months before he died. It states that 14 Cutters Gap Road, all land, all structures, and all contents, known or unknown, were to pass to you alone." Mara opened her eyes. "Known or unknown." Those exact words. She looked toward the fireplace wall. He knew. Warren spoke carefully. "He told me he had reason to believe the house held more than it appeared to hold. He would not say more, but he was very specific about protecting you." Mara did not speak. For years she had wondered what it would have cost her father to choose her once without needing to be asked. Now she was holding proof that at the end he had. Before Warren ended the call, his voice changed. "Mara, there is one more thing." She waited. "County records show an access request for that property 3 weeks before your father passed. By whom? Ellis Bellamy." The kitchen seemed to grow colder. Mara remembered the footprints in the dust. Adult boots. Recent. Crossing from the back door to the center of the room, then stopping near the fireplace wall. Ellis had been here. He had stood on this land, maybe inside this house, and known more than he admitted. Then he had sat in the attorney's office and laughed. "Did he go in?" Mara asked. "The official record says exterior inspection only," Warren said. "But he filed the request. He was on the property. That matters." After the call, Mara stood in the kitchen for a long time. By evening, Grant called. He spoke gently. He said families should not be divided by money. He said their father had been confused near the end. He said they should sit down. Mara let him finish. "Dad left clear instructions," she said. Grant sighed. "You cannot think this is fair." "I know what I was given," Mara said, "and I know who drove out here to look instead of laughing." 2 days later, Ellis called. He talked about pressure mistakes and misunderstandings. He did not mention the access request. Mara waited for him to tell the truth. He did not. So she said, "You had your chance, Ellis." Then she hung up and went back to work. Mara kept working because the house did not care about lawsuits. The roof leaked over the back stairs. The kitchen window rattled in the wind. The upstairs hallway still had a hole wide enough for Jonah to drop a pencil through if Mara stopped watching him. The money was not in her account yet. Adrian Cole had explained that careful sales took time. The notes needed a paper currency specialist. The coins needed buyers who understood them. The letter needed a historical institution. So Mara waited, and while she waited, she worked. 3 mornings a week, she drove to the motel outside Lexington and cleaned rooms until her hands smelled like bleach. The other days, she drove to Cutters Gap Road and carried out what the years had left behind. Broken plaster, rotten boards, sacks of mouse nests, old shingles. Jonah helped after school. Mostly he sorted nails into jars, swept the same corner twice, and drew plans in his sketchbook. He drew the house with windows full of yellow light. He drew a garden near the porch. He drew his own bedroom with a desk under the window. One afternoon, Mara was on a ladder above the kitchen roof, trying to nail down a sheet of felt paper before rain came in. She was doing it wrong and knew it. She just did not know the right way yet. A truck slowed on the gravel lane. An older man leaned out the window. "You trying to fix that roof or teach it bad habits?" he called. Mara looked down. "Learning," she said. He parked without asking permission. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and wore a tool belt that looked like it had survived 3 generations of houses. "Calvin Rusk," he said. "I used to frame barns before my knees got smarter than me. I do not have money to hire you. Did not ask if you did." He climbed the ladder, slowly took the hammer from her hand, and showed her how to overlap the felt so water would shed instead of sneak under. He stayed 2 hours. Before leaving, he looked at the house, then at her. "This place still has a spine," he said. Mara almost smiled. "That is what I thought." Calvin came back the next Saturday with drip-edge nails and his granddaughter, who was Jonah's age and shy, for 6 minutes. After that, the children chased each other around the yard while Mara learned how to patch a roofline. Then Lila Morrow appeared with soup. She was a retired schoolteacher from Creole Junction, small and straight-backed, carrying a pot wrapped in towels. "I heard there was a child out here eating crackers for supper," she said. Jonah looked guilty. Mara said, "People talk too much." Lila handed her the pot. "Sometimes that is how help finds the right road." She stayed on the porch while Jonah told her about the secret safe, leaving out the parts Mara had asked him not to share. The next week, Lila brought books, 2 winter coats, and a lamp that ran on batteries. The strange thing was that Mara's own brothers kept calling about fairness, while strangers kept showing up with nails, soup, and time. That difference settled in her quietly. It did not make her bitter. It made her clearer. 6 weeks after Adrian's first visit, he returned with Denise Mercer, a currency specialist from Louisville. They worked at the kitchen table for half a day. Denise checked the paper, the seals, the serial numbers, and the corners. When they finished, Adrian placed a folder in front of Mara. The final working value after fees and conservative sale estimates should leave you with about $341,000. Mara read the number, $341,000. She did not speak. Jonah stood in the doorway, reading her face. "Good news?" he asked. Mara opened her arms. He came to her, and she held him so tightly he laughed. "Does this mean we are rich?" he asked. "No," Mara said into his hair. "It means we can breathe." The formal letter arrived 9 days later. A law firm in Lexington representing Grant and Ellis claimed the discovered items were undisclosed estate assets. They demanded that Mara stop all sales until the matter was settled. Mara read the letter once, then again. Her hands did not shake. She photographed it and sent it to Warren Pike. His reply came within 10 minutes. "Expected. Do not respond. We are ready." Mara folded the letter and set it beside the lantern. There was still plaster to pull from the upstairs hall. There was still a roof to finish. There was still a child who needed dinner homework and a place to believe would remain standing. So Mara put on her work gloves. Outside, the sky had cleared. The evening light touched the ruined porch, the patched windows, the chimney, and the county. Notice still leaning near the lane. Demolition order. Mara looked at it for a moment. Then she walked past it into the house. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning at the Creole County Courthouse. The building sat on the town square limestone walls, bright in the cold March sun. Inside, the floors smelled of polish and old wood. Every footstep sounded too clear. Mara arrived with Warren Pike. She wore the only dark dress she owned and a coat Lila had pressed for her the night before. Jonah was at school. Calvin had offered to drive her, but Mara said no. This was something she needed to walk into on her own feet. Grant and Ellis stood near the courtroom doors, with 2 attorneys from Lexington. Grant looked offended, as if the whole morning were an inconvenience caused by Mara's stubbornness. Ellis looked at the floor. For 1 second, his eyes met hers. Then he looked away. The judge was Helen Carr, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, narrow glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had listened to too many people confuse disappointment with injustice. Warren presented first. He submitted the will, the property transfer, the affidavit Silas Bellamy had signed 14 months before his death. He read the line that mattered most in a steady voice. "All land structures and contents, whether known or unknown." Mara kept her hands folded in her lap. The opposing attorney stood next. He spoke about fairness. He spoke about surprise. He said the items found in the wall safe were never specifically named in the estate papers. Then his voice softened in a way Mara disliked before he even finished the sentence. He suggested that Mara's caregiving had created pressure on a sick man. The words landed quietly, but they cut deeply. Mara thought of the hospital chair, the pill boxes, the midnight calls, the grocery bags carried into her father's kitchen. She thought of every mile she had driven with too little gas and too much anger. To hear those things turned into strategy made her stomach tighten, but she did not speak. Warren did. He submitted statements from Silas's doctor, 2 nurses, and a neighbor who had known him for 15 years. Each one said Silas was clear-minded when the affidavit was signed. Each one said Mara had helped him long before there was any promise of inheritance. Then Warren placed one more document on the table, county access records for 14 Cutter's Gap Road. The room shifted. Grant frowned. Ellis went still. Warren explained that Ellis Bellamy had requested access to the property 3 weeks before Silas died. He had been on the land before the will was read. He had chosen not to disclose that visit when claiming he had been surprised by the condition, value, and contents of the property. Warren did not accuse him of anything more. He did not need to. Judge Carr read the papers in silence. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Finally, she looked up. The will was clear. The affidavit was clear. Kentucky property law did not support the claim that discovered contents inside a legally transferred property should return to the estate. The allegation of undue influence was unsupported by the evidence presented. Then she glanced at Ellis. The access record also weakened the claim of complete surprise. The motion was denied in full. No one cheered. Mara only exhaled. Outside, the air was cold and bright. Grant walked past without looking at her. Ellis stopped near the courthouse steps. "I should have told you I went there," he said. Mara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "You should have. I did not know about the safe." "Maybe not." He swallowed. "I was angry." Mara waited, but anger does not make truth optional, she said. Ellis had no answer. Mara turned and walked to Warren's car. For the first time since the will was read, the house at Cutter's Gap felt fully hers. At last, truly. The sale took 4 months. Adrian would not let Mara rush it. He said rushed people became easy prey, and Mara had already spent enough of her life being treated that way. The currency went first divided between a private collector in Nashville and an auction house in Louisville. The gold coins went through a numismatic dealer in Chicago. The jewelry and the pocket watch were sold through a Kentucky estate auction. The letter from Edmund Weller was different. Mara could have sold it to a private buyer, but the thought of it disappearing into someone's drawer bothered her. That letter had waited in a wall for 80 years. It deserved more light than that. So she spoke with the Kentucky Historical Society in Frankfort. They wanted the letter as a permanent document. They also wanted to create a small display about Edmund Weller, the house at 14 Cutter's Gap Road, and the kind of faith it took to hide something for a future stranger. Mara agreed, but only after they promised Edmund's name would stay with the story. When the final accounting arrived, the number after all fees was $341,000. Mara sat at the kitchen table and looked at it on her phone. For a long time, the largest numbers near her name had been amounts owed, rent due, storage past due, medical balance, car repair estimate. Now there was a number that did not ask anything from her. It gave something back. She used the money carefully. She paid the storage bill. She fixed the roof, the wiring, and the plumbing. She replaced the cracked windows, but kept the old frames where Calvin said they could be saved. She opened a savings account for Jonah and put enough in it that he would have choices one day. She did not buy a new life. She repaired the one that had been waiting. By June, the county inspector returned to Cutter's Gap Road. Calvin stood beside him with coffee. Lila sat on the porch steps with Jonah pretending not to listen. Mara stood in the yard with her hands tucked into her pockets. The inspector walked through every room. He checked the railings, the wiring, the chimney, the back stairs, the roof line, and the new supports under the porch. Then he signed the paper. The demolition order was lifted. Jonah shouted first. Lila cried quietly. Calvin cleared his throat and said there was still trim work to do because men like Calvin did not know how to say they were proud without naming another job. That evening, Mara stood alone on the back porch. The fields were green now. The creek beyond the barn moved softly through the trees. Warm light spilled from the kitchen window onto the porch boards. Inside, Jonah was laughing at something Lila had said, and the sound moved through the rooms as if the house had been waiting years to hear a child again. Mara thought about the day she first saw it. Broken windows, burned roof, county notice, Grant laughing, Ellis looking away. She thought about Silas in the hospital, his cold hand in hers saying she could see the good bones. For most of her life, Mara had wanted an apology that sounded like words. Clear, direct, easy to recognize. Silas had not given her that. Not exactly. He had given her a house no one else wanted, a key, a chance. A final act of trust wrapped in something that looked worthless. He had not left her a rescue. He had left her proof. Proof that he had seen her. Proof that the daughter who kept showing up was the one worth believing in. Mara looked toward the wall beside the fireplace. The safe was gone now, but the outline remained faintly visible if the light hit it right. She hoped it would always show a little. Some scars should not vanish completely. Some should stay as evidence that something was broken and still held. Then Mara went inside, closed the door behind her, and sat beside her son in the house that had finally come home for both of them, safe, whole together at last.